June 4th, 1944. A gray dawn bleeds over the southern coast of England. Wind howls across a maze of canvas and rubber. Dozens of tanks, trucks, and landing craft. Silent, motionless, waiting. Private Jack Ellison of the U.S. 23rd Headquarters. Special Troops cups his hands to light a cigarette, glancing at the rows of inflatable Sherman tanks that stretch into the mist. Each one is painted with oil and mud, perfectly weathered to fool an enemy pilot's lens. Hard to believe, he mutters, exhaling smoke. A whole damn army, and not one of them real. From above, the deception is flawless. RAF reconnaissance flights sweep the sky, taking photos for confirmation. To any German observer, whether through binoculars across the channel or a Luftwaffe camera, it looks like the Allies are massing for an invasion near Dover, the narrowest point between Britain and France. But this is no ordinary army. It's a ghost. And its purpose is not to fight, but to lie. Across southern England, a theater of illusion has been built on a scale never before imagined. Dummy aircraft dot airfields in Kent, fake landing craft line estuaries in the Thames. Entire radio networks hum with artificial chatter, coded transmissions mimicking the rhythm of a real invasion force. Each message, every decoy, carefully scripted by British and American intelligence to lure Hitler into a trap. Behind the curtain of this phantom army lies Operation Fortitude, part of the larger deception plan known as Operation Bodyguard. Its architects, men like Colonel David Strangeways and General Frederick Morgan, understood one truth. D-Day's success depended not just on surprise, but on belief. The Germans must believe the main invasion would strike not at Normandy, but at Calais, and so the Allies invented an army to prove it. They called it the 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG. Under the command of one man, the Germans feared and respected above all others, General George S. Patton. Though Patton had been quietly sidelined after slapping a soldier in Sicily, to German intelligence he remained the Allies' deadliest weapon. His reputation for aggression, his speed, his fury, they made him the perfect phantom commander. As the Channel Wine screamed that June morning, Patton himself toured Dover's coast, playing his role with theatrical precision. He was the living anchor of the Ghost Fleet, a visible sign that the Allies' main force gathered opposite Calais. And in Berlin, that's exactly what they wanted Hitler to believe. The Japanese naval attaché in Berlin, Captain Hideo Hori, recorded in his diary that the Germans remain convinced the invasion will strike at Calais. Tokyo's admirals, studying the intelligence flowing through diplomatic channels, nodded in agreement. They trusted the Reich's assessment. The Allies would land where the channel was narrowest, where logistics made sense. They were wrong, deadly wrong. By June 6th, 1944, when Allied landing craft thundered through the rough surf toward Normandy's beaches, the Ghost Fleet still haunted Dover's waters. The deception was working. German panzer divisions, Hitler's armored fist, stayed frozen near Calais, awaiting the real invasion that never came. But the Japanese wouldn't realize how completely their Axis partners had been deceived until months later. When they did, the revelation would ripple across Tokyo's naval command, proof that even the greatest war machines could be undone by shadows and lies. The story of that Ghost Fleet begins not with D-Day itself, but with the men who built an entire army from air, radio waves, and imagination, and who, in doing so, reshaped the fate of the Second World War. January 1944. London, England. The rain beat steadily against the windows of a nondescript brick building on St. James's Square, headquarters of the London Controlling Section, known only to a select few within the Allied command structure. Inside, under the dim light of desk lamps, maps of Europe sprawled across every wall. Colored pins marked troop movements, shipping routes, and, most crucially, the web of lies that would become Operation Bodyguard. Colonel John Bevan, the head of the LCS, leaned over a map of northern France, his voice low and deliberate. "Gentlemen, if we can convince Berlin that the invasion will strike at Calais, we might win this war before it truly begins." Opposite him, a sharp-eyed Scotsman, Colonel David Strangeways of the British 21st Army Group, adjusted his glasses. "Then we'll give them Calais, an entire army's worth." From that exchange, the seed of Operation Fortitude was born, split into two prongs. Fortitude North, aimed at convincing the Germans that an attack would come from Scotland toward Norway, and Fortitude South, the far more daring illusion centered on Calais. To carry out the deception, the Allies enlisted minds as unorthodox as their mission. Stage designers, artists, radio engineers, and intelligence officers collaborated to turn imagination into military strategy. From the American side came a unit that would later become legendary. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known colloquially as the Ghost Army. Their tools were unlike any arsenal seen before. Inflatable tanks made of rubberized canvas, collapsible wooden aircraft, and fake landing craft constructed from tar and wire mesh. Even their tire tracks were fabricated, dragged across fields by jeeps towing heavy chains to simulate the passage of armored columns. A British intelligence officer, Major Roger Fleetwood Hesketh, later wrote, "Our weapons were whispers and shadows. Our battlefield, the enemy's mind." While the Ghost Army prepared its stage, the deception expanded across multiple fronts. Bletchley Park, home of Britain's codebreakers, ensured that German agents received only carefully curated fragments of false intelligence. MI5's famed double-cross network, composed of turned German spies, fed Berlin a steady diet of lies. Troop buildups in Kent, endless convoys to Dover, and eyewitness reports of Patton's headquarters near Canterbury. Even the airwaves became a weapon. A team of Royal Signals officers, trained in German radio interception, constructed an entire phantom communication network for the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group. Operators followed realistic schedules, transmitting coded messages in the style of actual units. The rhythm of radio chatter, the cadence, the pauses, even the background static, was studied meticulously to mimic real divisions. By spring, Fortitude was taking shape not as a single deception, but as a symphony of illusions. Every element, visual, auditory, informational, played a role in the grand lie. Meanwhile, in Berlin, the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service, compiled reports from agents and radio intercepts. Their conclusion was unequivocal. The Allies would attack at Calais. Hitler himself believed it. He had long insisted that Calais, the closest point to England, must be the invasion site. The terrain was flatter, the ports better suited to logistics. Logic was on his side, so when intelligence confirmed his bias, he embraced it without question. In a dimly lit situation room beneath the Reich Chancellery, maps of Western Europe covered the walls. Hitler traced his finger along the French coastline, stopping at Calais. "Here," he said, his voice sharp and certain. "They will come here. Normandy is a diversion." By May 1944, nearly half of Germany's Western armored divisions were positioned in the Pas-de-Calais region, ready to repel an invasion that would never arrive. Fortitude was already succeeding before the first Allied ship left port. And yet, as the Allies prepared to launch the greatest amphibious invasion in history, every man involved in the deception understood the stakes. If the Germans saw through the illusion, if even one piece of the ruse failed, then the beaches of Normandy could become a graveyard for 500,000 soldiers. Colonel Strangeways addressed his deception team at a small airfield outside Portsmouth, the air thick with anticipation. "Remember," he said, "the success of D-Day depends on how well we lie. Not to our men, not to our allies, but to the enemy. And we must make them believe our lies more than they believe their eyes." The men of the Ghost Army went to work under strict secrecy. By early June, southern England had become a stage so convincing that even Allied pilots, flying overhead on training runs, mistook the rubber tanks for the real thing. And on German radar screens, a fleet of invasion barges gathered at Dover. Radio echoes generated by Allied technicians manipulating false signals. It was a masterpiece of illusion. And yet, its brilliance would only be measured by silence. The quieter the German response at Normandy, the louder Fortitude's success would echo through history. And while the Allies built ghosts in England, the Axis powers watched from afar, unaware that what they saw was nothing but smoke and mirrors. In Tokyo, naval intelligence officers pored over reports from their Berlin counterparts, convinced they were witnessing the prelude to the true invasion. They could not have known that those reports were themselves part of the illusion, one that would haunt them long after the tides of war turned. June 2nd, 1944, near Dover, England. The Channel winds carried the scent of oil and salt through the makeshift encampment of the 1st U.S. Army Group. Inflatable tanks lined the hedgerows, their rubber hulls glistening under a thin drizzle. Plywood trucks stood in rows, painted with careful imperfections. Rust streaks, mud splatter, dents, each a deliberate stroke in an artist's illusion. Private Jack Ellison tightened the ropes around a canvas jeep as his sergeant, a wiry man with a Boston accent, barked orders. "Keep those inflatables in line, boys. Luftwaffe might be over any minute, and I don't want one of those damned tanks deflating in front of Jerry's camera." Across the hills, loudspeakers began to play the clamor of an army on the move. Engines rumbling, metal clanging, shouted orders. The sound was recorded days earlier from actual divisions assembling further west. Every decibel mattered. This was Operation Quicksilver, the sonic half of Fortitude South, the ghost made audible. Meanwhile, a few miles away, an RAF officer known only by his code name Faber sat in a hidden radio truck, headphones pressed against his ears. Around him, operators tapped out encrypted messages, unit requests, weather reports, troop updates, all addressed to divisions that did not exist. Each signal was carefully timed to suggest movement. The 14th Armored Division advancing toward Dover. The 9th Airborne assembling near Canterbury. From the German side, the chatter painted a vivid picture. Patton's mighty army preparing for a cross-channel assault straight at Calais, and the Germans bought it. From occupied France, German intercept stations recorded the transmissions. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographed rows of tanks and aircraft. Reports flooded the German High Command. Large concentrations of Allied forces near Dover and the Thames estuary. In Berlin, General Alfred Jodl read the updates with grim satisfaction. "At last," he told Hitler, "the enemy prepares for Calais." While Europe held its breath, deep beneath London, the War Cabinet convened in Churchill's underground bunker. Maps of the English Channel stretched across the wall, dotted with pins and handwritten annotations. Colonel Bevan stood before the Prime Minister, briefing him on the deception's progress. "The Germans have fully accepted the existence of the 1st U.S. Army Group, sir. Their radio intercepts confirm it. Our agents report that Field Marshal von Rundstedt is reinforcing Calais." Churchill puffed on his cigar, eyes narrowing through the smoke. "Good. Let them stare at the wrong shore." He turned to General Eisenhower. "When do we move?" Eisenhower, composed but weary, checked his notes. "Weather permitting, June 5th. But if the storm continues, we may need to delay." Outside, the skies darkened. The English Channel roared with wind and rain. For 2 days, D-Day hung in suspension. And yet, the delay only strengthened Fortitude's illusion. The Ghost Army continued to mobilize. The phantom radio traffic increased. And Luftwaffe pilots who flew reconnaissance over Dover returned with photos of what appeared to be invasion fleets forming at anchor. But there were no fleets, only decoy ships made of wood and canvas. some so light they swayed on their moorings when the waves hit them. Others existed only on radar, created by Allied engineers using reflectors designed to mimic the electronic signature of steel hulls. The deception reached its crescendo on the night of June 5th. As the storm raged over the Channel, hundreds of real Allied ships departed from southern ports, bound not for Calais, but for Normandy. Meanwhile, false signals broadcast from Dover suggested that the main fleet was still waiting for the weather to clear. In Pas-de-Calais, German coastal batteries remained on high alert. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander-in-chief of German forces in the west, refused to move his panzers south. His intelligence told him that any invasion in Normandy would be a feint, a distraction meant to lure German reserves away from Calais. And so, when dawn broke on June 6th, and paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne descended over Normandy's hedgerows, the German High Command hesitated. The reports of landings at Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches were dismissed as diversions. Hitler himself slept through the first hours of D-Day. His staff did not dare wake him. By the time he was informed, it was too late. The Allied foothold was growing stronger with every tide. Yet the Führer clung to his conviction. Normandy was the decoy. Calais was the prize. In Tokyo, word of the invasion reached the Imperial General Staff through diplomatic cables from Berlin. Japanese intelligence officers convened in the Naval General Staff building on Toranomon Hill. Maps of Europe were spread across the table, markers representing Allied and German divisions. Admiral Osami Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, adjusted his spectacles as an aide translated the German communiqué. Enemy landings detected near Normandy. Likely diversion. Main enemy force remains positioned opposite Calais. Nagano nodded. It aligns with our expectations. The Western Allies will not risk their supply lines across that wide sea. Calais is their logical strike. Tokyo's admirals, men trained in the art of naval misdirection themselves, accepted the analysis without question. Their war in the Pacific had long relied on deception, feigned retreats, false convoys, and hidden carriers. But none imagined that the Western Allies were now wielding deception as an empire-wide weapon. While Nagano believed in the illusion, the real invasion raged across the Norman coast. Thousands of Allied soldiers fought and died in the surf, while hundreds of fake tanks still glistened in the English rain. The ghosts had done their job. The Germans remained fixed on Calais for weeks, paralyzed by a phantom. And the Japanese, watching from afar, trusted the Mirage as truth. An illusion so complete, it reshaped the course of history. But the story was far from over. Because even after Normandy was secured, the deception had to continue until the very end. June 7th, 1944, the second day of the invasion. Over the beaches of Normandy, smoke coiled upward like black ribbons. The sea was choked with the wrecks of landing craft. Men clung to debris, praying for rescue. Yet despite the carnage, the Allies had secured their foothold. Beachheads at Omaha and Gold were holding, but back in Germany's fortified bunkers, disbelief reigned. Field Marshal von Rundstedt received reports from Normandy that thousands of Allied troops had come ashore. But still, his analysts insisted it was a ruse. The real invasion, they said, was imminent at Calais. In Berlin, Hitler's intelligence chief, General Walter Warlimont, relayed the Führer's orders to the Western Front. Hold your reserves. The main attack has not yet begun. So the panzers stayed idle. The 15th Army, 35 divisions strong, remained dug in around Calais, waiting for an invasion fleet that would never come. Every day they waited, Normandy's beachheads grew stronger. Every day of inaction gave Eisenhower's forces room to expand, to build, to bleed, but not to break. Aboard the HMS Bulolo, anchored off Normandy's coast, British staff officers received decoded intercepts from Ultra, the intelligence derived from cracked German Enigma transmissions. The messages confirmed what the Allies dared to hope. The Germans still believed in the ghost. Major General Percy Hobart leaned over the reports and laughed quietly. "They're still waiting for Patton," he said. "God help them." Indeed, Patton, real, flesh-and-blood Patton, was now commanding the U.S. Third Army in England, kept deliberately inactive. His very existence had become part of the lie. German agents had tracked his movements to Kent, to Canterbury, to Dover. Fake press leaks and accidental sightings reinforced the story. Patton's army was poised to strike at Calais. To the Germans, this made perfect sense. Hitler had always believed Patton to be the Allies' finest field commander, a man of boldness and aggression. Surely, Hitler reasoned, such a man would lead the decisive blow. And so, even as the Allies poured men and supplies into Normandy, the Germans waited for the real battle to begin. For weeks, reconnaissance aircraft flew over Dover and the Thames estuary, reporting constant activity. They saw the same rubber tanks, the same dummy ships, still intact, still convincing. The Allies maintained the illusion with ruthless precision. When Luftwaffe bombers approached, anti-aircraft guns fired blanks to imitate active defense. Dummy fires burned at night to simulate cooking tents and vehicle maintenance. Engineers even inflated new tanks every few days to replace those damaged by weather or stray shells. Behind the curtain, Operation Fortitude continued to hum like a well-tuned machine. The fake radio traffic persisted, transmitting updates about the first U.S. Army group preparing to move. "Movement postponed due to weather," one message read. Another reported new supply convoys arriving for Patton's divisions. Each transmission added another layer to the lie. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Tokyo's military attachés received increasingly confused reports from Berlin. By late June, Japanese intelligence officers noticed a contradiction. The Germans continued to insist that the Allies' main blow was still to come. Yet the situation at Normandy grew dire. French resistance reports spoke of Allied reinforcements pushing deep inland. American tanks were moving through the bocage, the thick hedgerows that once protected farmers and now hid death. Admiral Nagano summoned a meeting in the Naval General Staff headquarters. The lights were dim, the air thick with tobacco smoke. "The Germans maintain that Calais remains the enemy's objective," he said, his voice calm but uncertain. "But this Normandy affair is growing larger than a diversion." Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki, Chief of Staff to the combined fleet, frowned. "Perhaps the enemy deceived our allies. Their capabilities and misdirection are not to be underestimated." The Japanese, masters of deception themselves, who had once cloaked an entire carrier strike force in radio silence to approach Pearl Harbor undetected, found the possibility deeply unsettling. Had the Allies turned deception into a strategic weapon more powerful than guns? In France, the truth was dawning with brutal clarity. By mid-July, Allied forces had captured Cherbourg and driven south toward Saint-Lô. The beaches were no longer fragile lodgements. They were fortresses. Supply lines stretched across the channel like arteries, pumping men and machines into Europe faster than the Germans could react. And still, Hitler refused to release the 15th Army from Calais. He was convinced that the Normandy invasion was only a diversionary landing, a trick to lure his main defenses away from the true objective. The Allied deception had not only fooled his generals, it had imprisoned his logic. General Erwin Rommel, returning from a meeting at Berchtesgaden, was livid. "My Führer," he had pleaded, "if we do not counterattack now, we shall lose France entirely." Hitler's response was cold and unyielding. "Patience, Rommel. The main invasion is yet to come. Calais will be the decisive front." Rommel left the meeting white-faced. His driver later recalled that the field marshal sat in silence for hours, staring out the car window as the alpine forests passed by. "We are fighting ghosts," he muttered finally, and the ghosts are winning. By early August, even the German High Command began to suspect the truth. Reports from the front made it undeniable. There was no second invasion, no Calais offensive. Normandy was the real blow, but the realization came too late. By then, the Allied breakout from St. Lo had begun. Patton, no longer a phantom, but flesh and fury, drove his real tanks across France in a lightning advance that shattered the German front. The deception had not merely delayed the enemy, it had dismantled his ability to react. Back in Tokyo, the Imperial Navy's intelligence section received the final reports from Berlin. Their analysts read in stunned silence as the details emerged. The vast 1st U.S. Army Group had never existed. The fleet off Dover had been a mirage, radar echoes, inflatables, painted shadows. Admiral Ugaki closed his folder slowly, his expression grave. "The Allies fought the Germans with illusions," he said, "and won." For Japan's admirals, men trained to value cunning and surprise, the lesson was both humiliating and profound. In the age of total war, deception was no longer a prelude to battle. It was the battle. The ghosts of Dover had changed everything. August 25th, 1944. Paris. The bells of Notre Dame rang as the French capital erupted in celebration. Crowds filled the boulevards, waving tricolor flags, shouting, "Vive la France!" Allied convoys rolled through the streets, dusty, exhausted, and triumphant. The liberation of Paris had come far sooner than even Eisenhower's staff dared hope. But in a dimly lit radio room in Berlin, the mood was apocalyptic. Reports from the Western Front streamed in. Patton's Third Army had reached the Seine. The German 15th Army, still entrenched around Calais, found itself encircled and useless, guarding against an invasion that had never existed. A clerk burst into the Situation Room, eyes wide. "Herr General, the Allies are across the Seine." Colonel General Alfred Jodl slammed his fist against the table. "Where is Rundstedt? Why didn't we move the Panzer divisions when we had the chance?" No one answered. Because the truth was unspeakable. They hadn't moved because they believed the lie. The Phantom Army, the inflatable tanks, the wooden aircraft, the false convoys, had immobilized the Wehrmacht's most powerful units for over 6 crucial weeks. Fortitude had bought the Allies time to transform a precarious beachhead into an unstoppable advance. By the time the Germans understood, the war in the West was lost. In Tokyo, the shock was equally profound. September 1944. The Naval General Staff convened for an emergency meeting in the underground war room beneath the Imperial Palace. Maps of Europe covered the walls, now dotted with Allied flags. Admiral Osami Nagano spoke first, his voice quiet but edged with disbelief. "We have confirmed from Berlin. Calais was a phantom. The invasion at Normandy was the true offensive all along." Admiral Ugaki, his hands clasped behind his back, paced slowly. "How?" he asked. "How could they have sustained a deception of such scale? For weeks, for months?" A young intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Kunitomo, stepped forward. "Sir, the Allies appear to have created entire divisions that never existed. They built fake camps, simulated radio networks, even used dummy ships to deceive German radar." He hesitated. "And they placed General Patton in command of this phantom force." A murmur spread through the room. Patton's name was known even in Tokyo. His lightning campaigns in North Africa and Sicily had been studied in their academies. To learn that he had been used as a decoy stunned them. Ugaki exhaled slowly. They used a man's reputation as a weapon. Nagano nodded. And it worked better than any fleet. Silence followed. For Japan's naval leaders, men who had once prided themselves on strategic deception, from the feigned retreat at Midway to the false radio traffic of Operation Kido Butai, this was a bitter realization. The Western Allies, whom they had dismissed as straightforward and unimaginative, had turned deception into an art form so intricate it rivaled any trick of Bushido or ancient Chinese stratagems. And more devastating still, their deception had decided the fate of the European war. Meanwhile, back in England, the men who had built the illusion dismantled it quietly. In a field outside Dover, the rubber tanks deflated one by one. Crews packed away the canvas and wooden frames. The loudspeakers went silent. The fake radio operators, who had spent months sending ghost messages into the ether, finally switched off their transmitters. Private Jack Ellison, the young soldier who had tended the inflatables since spring, watched as the last of the ghost army vanished into the back of a truck. "Hard to believe we fooled the whole damn Reich," he said to his sergeant. The sergeant grinned. "We didn't just fool 'em, kid. We bought every man on those beaches a chance to live." Across the channel, Normandy's fields were littered with the remains of real war. Burned-out tanks, shattered gliders, the wreckage of liberation. The ghosts of Dover had played their part, unseen and unheard, but vital all the same. Operation Fortitude was soon classified. For decades, the details remained locked away in military archives. Even many of the soldiers who had built the decoys never knew the full scale of the deception they'd been part of. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Allies' secrets began to trickle out, first in whispers, then in memoirs. British intelligence officer Ewan Montague, one of Fortitude's architects, later wrote, "It was a battle fought not with bullets, but with belief. And belief, once captured, is a far more enduring victory." In post-war Japan, former naval officers studied the operation with astonishment. One retired admiral reportedly remarked, "We understood the sea, the air, and the sword, but not the shadow. The Americans have learned to fight with shadows." To them, Operation Fortitude represented a new kind of warfare, a realm where illusion and intelligence could outmaneuver brute force. And yet, the irony lingered. The Japanese themselves had mastered misdirection at sea, concealing fleets behind weather fronts, transmitting fake coordinates to confuse the enemy. But while their deceptions served individual battles, the Allies had expanded the concept to an entire theater of war. Fortitude was not just a trick, it was a philosophy. Years later, when Allied archives were declassified, historians would call Operation Fortitude the most successful deception in military history. It had convinced Hitler to hold back 150,000 troops and 22 panzer divisions from the Normandy front. It prolonged the enemy's confusion for nearly 2 months and ensured the Allies could secure France with far fewer losses than expected. Even the Japanese historians, writing after the war, acknowledged the genius of it. One analysis published by the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo described it simply: "The Western Allies achieved victory not through overwhelming strength alone, but by mastering the invisible battlefield, the mind of the enemy." In the end, the Ghost Fleet off Dover had never fired a shot, but it might as well have sunk 1,000 ships. Its power lay not in destruction, but in persuasion. The Japanese admirals, who once viewed war as a contest of steel and honor, were forced to confront a humbling truth. In the age of total war, even admirals could be fooled by ghosts. On a foggy morning in 1946, long after the guns fell silent, a British farmer discovered a deflated Sherman tank half buried in a hedgerow near Dover. The rubber was torn, the paint faded, the once proud illusion reduced to a husk. He stood there for a moment, staring at it, before whispering to himself, "They really did fight a war of shadows." He wasn't wrong, for beneath the thunder of D-Day, beneath the courage of the men who stormed the beaches, and beneath the waves that carried them there, another battle had been fought, a quiet, invisible war waged in radio waves and whispers. And when it ended, the victors had names not etched in stone or carved in metals, but written in silence. Those who made the enemy see what wasn't there and believe it until it was too late. The ghosts of Fortitude would never march in parades. But they had already changed the course of history.